My name is Mildred Adams, and I'm 38. 3 months ago, my parents sold the house they'd lived in for 30 years, handed every dollar to my younger brother as a wedding gift, and then announced, like it was already settled, that they were moving into my rental house. When I said no, they tried to force their way in anyway. That was just the beginning. I've been married to my husband, Caleb, for 6 years. He's an architect, methodical, calm, the kind of man who can spot a structural flaw before it turns into a collapse. I run a custom furniture business that I built from scratch. No investors, no family money, just long nights, scraped knuckles, and a stubborn refusal to quit. We own 2 houses. The one we live in is comfortable, not flashy. The second is an investment property I bought 3 years ago. It's smaller, quiet, and until my family decided to turn it into a battlefield, it was the easiest part of my life. I rent it to a young couple, Max and Jenny. They pay on time, they're respectful, they treat the place like a home, not a temporary stop. In other words, they're exactly the kind of tenants every landlord hopes for, which is probably why my parents didn't see them as people at all. To my parents, the house wasn't occupied by a couple with a lease. It was just something I owned. Something they felt entitled to. I grew up with one sibling, my younger brother Eli, now 35. If you ask my parents, he's been on the verge of success for most of his adult life. If you ask me, he's never held a real job longer than a few months. College? Paid for by our parents. Business ideas? Funded. Failures? Excused. Every time one of his ventures crashed and burned, my parents framed it as a learning experience. Proof that he was brave enough to try. When I wanted to start my furniture business, I sat at their kitchen table and laid out a real plan. Costs, materials, timelines. My dad barely looked up. Too risky, he said. You should get a stable job. Benefits. Something dependable. Something dependable. Like Eli calling himself an entrepreneur while living off my parents. Fast forward to now. Eli is engaged to a woman named Daphne. She has expensive taste and absolutely no interest in where money comes from. Designer clothes, weekend trips, endless talk about their luxury lifestyle. She doesn't work. She's building her brand, which, as far as I can tell, means posting selfies and makeup tutorials for a few hundred followers while planning a wedding that looks more like a magazine shoot than a ceremony. And yet somehow, she talks like a penthouse is a basic human right. Then, 3 months ago, my mom called me sounding euphoric. Mildred, we sold the house. The house. The one my parents bought when my dad first got his job at the power company. The house they'd lived in for 30 years. The house I assumed they'd keep until retirement forced them to downsize. I congratulated them, genuinely happy at first. I figured you'd move into something smaller, I said. You know, less upkeep. Oh, we're thrilled, she replied. We got such a good price. It feels like a fresh start. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, we gave the money to Eli. I froze. You gave him what? I asked. All of it, she said brightly. About $450,000. It's his wedding gift. He found this beautiful penthouse downtown. My brain started racing. If they gave Eli every dollar from the sale, where exactly were they planning to live? Mom, I said slowly, what about your retirement? Oh, we've got it handled, she replied. We're moving into your rental house. Just like that. No question, no discussion, no hesitation. My rental house is occupied, I said. I have tenants. Well, she said, clearly annoyed now. You can just tell them to leave. I felt something snap inside me. You want me to break a legal lease? I asked. You want me to throw 2 people out of their home because you gave away your entire safety net? My dad's voice came on the line, sharp and cold. We raised you, Mildred. This is what family does for each other. Family. The same family that paid for Eli's college while I worked multiple jobs. The same family that funded his failures while telling me to be realistic. And now, the same family that handed him nearly $500,000 and expected me to clean up the mess. No, I said, that's not happening. There was a brief, stunned silence. We'll talk about this in person, my mother said softly. We'll come by soon. That sentence sat heavy in my chest. I hung up and turned to see Caleb standing in the doorway. He'd heard enough. "Please tell me you're not considering this," he said. "Not for a second," I replied. But I knew my parents. They didn't hear boundaries. They heard resistance. And resistance only made them push harder. A few days later, I was at my workshop when my phone started ringing non-stop. It was Max. I almost ignored it. Almost. Something told me not to. "Mildred," he said as soon as I answered, his voice tight with panic. "There are people at our front door saying they own the house." My stomach dropped. "They have suitcases," he continued. "They're banging on the door. The woman is screaming that we're trespassing." I already knew the answer, but I asked anyway. "Did they say who they are?" "Yes," he said quietly. "They said they're your parents." I closed my eyes. "Do not open the door," I said immediately. "Not for any reason. I'm on my way." I grabbed my keys and left the workshop without even shutting everything down properly. As I drove across town, one thought kept looping through my head. They weren't asking anymore. They were taking. I don't remember most of the drive across town. I remember red lights. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. And I remember this strange, sinking calm that settled over me halfway there. The kind that comes right before something ugly finally shows its face. Part of me still hoped there had been some misunderstanding, that maybe my parents were just confused, lost, that they hadn't really done what Max said they were doing. That hope died the moment I pulled up to the house. My parents' car was parked crooked at the curb, half on the street, half blocking the driveway, like they planned to stay a while. 2 large suitcases sat on the porch. Shopping bags were piled near the door. And there was my mother, pounding on the front door with the flat of her hand, like she was trying to break it down. My dad stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight, wearing that familiar expression, the one that used to mean I was in trouble as a kid. I parked and got out of the car. "Mildred!" my mom shouted the second she saw me. Her anger vanished, replaced instantly by relief. "Thank God you're here. These people won't leave." I took a breath, then another. "Mom," I said evenly, "what are you doing?" She gestured at the door like the answer was obvious. "We're moving in. We told you we needed a place to stay, and I told you no." My dad stepped forward. "We've been staying at an extended stay hotel for 2 weeks, waiting for you to come to your senses." 2 weeks. 2 weeks of hotel bills instead of looking for an apartment. 2 weeks of waiting me out, assuming I'd fold. "That was your choice," I said. "You sold your house and gave the money away. That doesn't make this my emergency." My mom's face tightened. "So you're really doing this? You're going to make your own parents homeless?" "They're not homeless," I replied. "They're trespassing." That's when she lost it. Her voice rose, sharp and shrill, echoing down the quiet street. She started talking about sacrifice, about how they'd given everything for their children, about how ungrateful I was, about how a good daughter would never treat her parents this way. The whole neighborhood could hear her. My dad tried a different tactic. Calm, controlled, dangerous. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "we already checked out of the hotel. We have nowhere else to go." There it was. The trap. They'd waited until the moment of maximum pressure, hoping I'd cave to avoid feeling responsible. "That doesn't change anything," I said. "You don't get to destroy my business and scare my tenants because you planned poorly." At that moment, the front door cracked open just enough for a face to appear. Maximum's. He looked pale, eyes wide, like he'd been holding his breath for 20 minutes. "Is everything okay?" he asked carefully. "Should we call someone?" My parents whipped around like he'd insulted them. "You wouldn't dare involve the police in a family matter," my dad snapped. "He absolutely would," I said. "And so would I." My mom turned back to me, tears streaming now, her voice trembling. "You're choosing strangers over family. Your grandmother would be ashamed." That one hit. Not because it was true, but because she knew exactly which buttons to press. "Grandma taught me not to bully people," I said quietly. "And she taught me not to steal." My dad's face darkened. "After everything we did for you." "What did you do for me?" I interrupted. "Because I paid for my own college. I built my business alone. And now you're funding Eli's penthouse while demanding I give you free housing. Explain that. He faltered, started talking about raising me, feeding me, keeping a roof over my head. You did the legal minimum, I said. Congratulations. My mom sobbed harder. Where are we supposed to go? Anywhere, I replied, just not here. Max spoke again, voice shaking. Do you want me to call the police? My parents stared at him like he'd just threatened them with a weapon. If you're not off this property in 5 minutes, I said calmly, call 911. My dad grabbed one of the suitcases. This isn't over, he muttered. You'll regret this. They loaded their bags back into the car while my mom cried loudly, making sure anyone watching knew exactly who the villain was supposed to be. When they drove away, the street went quiet. Max and Ginny opened the door fully then. Ginny was shaking. I'm so sorry, I told them. This should never have happened. They admitted they'd been hiding in the bedroom, terrified my parents would break the door down. I gave them my direct number and told them to call me immediately if my parents showed up again. I even told them I'd understand if they wanted to break the lease early. They didn't. They just wanted peace. I didn't get that luxury. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7 a.m. First was my aunt, then a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, then another, and another. Same script. How could I do this to my parents? How could I abandon family? What kind of daughter chooses money over blood? Not one of them asked what actually happened. Not one. By noon, I'd received over a dozen messages, long, guilt-soaked texts about loyalty and sacrifice. My cousin even messaged me on Facebook, claiming my parents were living like refugees in a hotel. What really stood out wasn't the judgment. It was the silence on one point. None of them offered to take my parents in. They all had opinions. None of them had spare rooms. When I pointed that out to my aunt during her second call, she said, well, you have more space. No, I have tenants. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't about family values. It was about punishment for being responsible. By Wednesday night, I was done. I opened my laptop and started writing. The most honest email of my life. And I sent it to everyone. I sat at the kitchen table long after Caleb went to bed, my laptop glowing in the dark like a confession booth. It took me 2 hours to write that email. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted every word to be undeniable, calm, factual, impossible to twist. The subject line was simple: setting the record straight. I laid out the timeline step by step. My parents sold their house for approximately $450,000. They gave all of it to my younger brother Eli as a wedding gift. They then informed me, without asking, that they would be moving into my rental house. I said no and offered to help them find appropriate housing. They refused and showed up unannounced, harassed my tenants, and attempted to force them out. I attached proof. Screenshots of text messages, a copy of the lease, property records showing when I bought the house and how much I paid. I wanted it crystal clear what I was being asked to do and who had created the problem. Then came the last paragraph. I listed every relative who had called or texted me about family duty and respect. And I wrote, since so many of you are deeply concerned about mom and dad's housing situation, I'm confident one of you will be happy to take them in. Family helps family, right? Please let me know who will be hosting them and when they can move in so I can pass along the address. I hit send at 11:02 p.m. to 30 people. The next morning, my phone was silent. No angry voicemails, no guilt-filled texts, no lectures about loyalty. It was the quietest morning I'd had in days. Around noon, the replies started coming in. They fell into 3 categories. The first group suddenly remembered they didn't actually have space after all. The second group went completely silent. No response, no acknowledgement, nothing. The third group doubled down. My uncle sent a dramatic essay about how I was destroying the family, dishonoring my ancestors, and betraying the people who made me who I am. I replied with one sentence: "What's your move-in date?" He never answered. The family Facebook group went dead. All those posts about duty and blood quietly disappeared like they'd never existed. By Friday, the calls had stopped, but I wasn't finished. I called Eli. He answered on the first ring. "What the hell did you send to everyone?" he snapped. "You made us look bad." "The truth usually does that," I said. "You're turning the family against us." "You did that when you took their entire retirement fund," I replied. "You have their money, Eli. You figure out their housing." He accused me of being selfish, cold, heartless. I hung up. A week later, I got a text from my cousin Maria, the only one who stayed neutral through all of it. "Hey," she wrote, "did you hear Eli's having trouble with the penthouse?" I hadn't, but I wasn't surprised. Turns out banks want proof of income. Not vibes, not potential, actual numbers. Eli couldn't provide them. Without financing, the penthouse fell through. The down payment, my parents' money, was tied up. And at the same time, Eli and Daphne were planning a massive wedding. 200 guests, expensive venue, open bar. 2 weeks before the ceremony, the venue asked for the final payment. Eli called my parents. They told him they had nothing left. So Eli started calling everyone else. Loans, temporary help, promises to pay it back once his business picked up. He even texted me, "Mildred, I know we've had our differences, but I could really use your help. It's only $15,000. Only." I didn't respond. Apparently no one else did either. 3 days before the wedding, the venue canceled. They ended up getting married in Daphne's parents' backyard. Half the guests didn't show. The ones who did whispered through the reception. According to Maria, Daphne cried most of the night. The same week, I closed on my third property, a small commercial building I'd been negotiating for months. I posted a simple photo of the keys on Instagram, another project in the works. Sometimes patience pays off. My parents didn't like the post, but they weren't done with me yet. The following Saturday morning, Caleb and I were sitting in the kitchen, talking about paint colors and baby names. Then the doorbell camera alert popped up. My parents were on our porch, dressed nicely, my mom holding flowers, my dad holding groceries, smiling straight into the camera. "Mildred," my mom said sweetly, "we know you're home." I felt my stomach tighten. They weren't apologizing. They were resetting. And I knew this time I wasn't opening the door. I stared at my phone, watching my parents perform for the doorbell camera like it was a daytime talk show audition. My mom held the bouquet up higher, angling it just right so the flowers filled the frame. My dad adjusted the grocery bag, making sure the logo was visible. "We brought food," he said warmly. "Your mother wants to cook that pot roast you always loved." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was textbook. Flowers, food, nostalgia, props designed to soften me up, to rewrite the last 3 months like they'd been a misunderstanding instead of a campaign. Caleb was standing beside me, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Please tell me you're not opening that door," he said quietly. "I'm not," I replied. Outside, my mom kept talking, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "We've been thinking about everything," she said. "We made mistakes. We should have asked your permission about the rental house. 8 months too late." They stood there for nearly 10 minutes, taking turns explaining how much they missed me, how painful the separation had been, how family should stick together. My mom even wiped her eyes dramatically, pausing so the camera could catch it. When it became clear I wasn't coming out, my dad's tone changed. "This is ridiculous, Mildred," he snapped. "We're your parents. Open the door so we can talk like adults." That was it. I dialed the police non-emergency line. "I need to report trespassing," I said calmly. "I have individuals on my property who've been told repeatedly not to come here. There's a prior incident involving harassment at another property." The dispatcher was professional, asked routine questions, and told me an officer was on the way. About 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. I watched from the window as the officer approached my parents. I couldn't hear everything, but I saw my dad gesturing sharply toward the house, probably framing it as a family disagreement. My mom clutched the flowers like they were proof of innocence. The officer pressed the doorbell. "Ma'am, this is Officer Reynolds. Could you come to the door, please?" I stepped outside and explained everything. Harassing my tenants, refusing to leave, months of manipulation. I showed him the incident report number from the rental house confrontation. "Do you want them to leave your property?" he asked. "Yes." "Have you told them not to return before?" "Multiple times." He nodded and walked back to them. This time my dad raised his voice. "This is our daughter's house. We have a right to be here." "Sir," the officer replied evenly, "your daughter has asked you to leave. Property rights still apply. You need to go." My mom cried again. The flowers drooped. But the officer didn't budge. They left. That Monday, I called my lawyer. "You've got grounds for a restraining order," he said, "especially with the tenant harassment." We filed immediately. My parents didn't even show up to the hearing. The judge granted it without hesitation. 200 yards from my home, my business, my rental property. I changed my phone number that week. Gave it only to people I trusted. The silence was incredible. For 3 weeks. Then my phone rang at the workshop. Unknown local number. "Is this Mildred Adams?" a man asked. "Yes." "I'm calling about the investment opportunity your brother pitched me last month." I froze. "What investment opportunity?" He hesitated. "The real estate portfolio. Eli said you two were partners." My heart dropped straight into my stomach. He'd already given Eli $5,000 as a good faith deposit. I learned quickly that Eli had been walking around town claiming he co-owned my business, showing photos of my properties, my home, my rentals, even the commercial building I just purchased. Fake profiles, fake titles, fake contracts. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was fraud. I called my lawyer. Then the police. The detective didn't mince words. "Your brother's committing identity theft." So I made one last call to the man Eli had scammed. "What if we let him think the deal is moving forward," I said, "and meet him?" We picked a coffee shop downtown. Eli arrived confident, carrying a folder full of lies. He was mid-sentence explaining our partnership when I stood up and walked over. "Hey, partner," I said. His face went white. The man recorded everything. Eli stammered, lied, backtracked. I stayed calm. "I built this business alone," I said clearly. "You don't own anything. You never did." Then I called the police, right there. They arrested him for fraud and identity theft. Later we learned he'd scammed 6 other people. He pled guilty. Probation. Restitution. When my parents found out, they blamed me. 6 months later, Eli and Daphne divorced. In my life, quiet, thriving, peaceful. Sometimes choosing sanity means letting the truth burn everything else down.